Five, four, and follow my lead. When I point to you, go ahead.
Okay.
Five, four, three.
Identifying as a mom, daughter, conservative, friend, parental rights activist, Republican Party delegate, lover of freedom, conspiracy theorist, mama bear, and force to be reckoned with, this is Raising Liberty with Lindsey Beckham. Good morning. I never get to say good morning. We are here this morning at a special time because we have a very special person with us, and I'm so honored and so excited to have Mississippi's State Auditor, Shad White, here this morning. Good morning, Shad.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate you rearranging your schedule to squeeze the auditor in. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're honored to do so. And we were just talking, you are just fresh back from that exciting convention, the Republican National Convention that just wound up in Milwaukee. And I know a lot of people had a rough time trying to get back. So I know you are so glad to be home and not have to be stuck in one of those airports overnight and waiting on flights. So we're glad that you made it home safely.
Yeah, it was a surreal experience being there. I mean, I was there with the Mississippi delegation, and our delegation got really lucky. We were about as close as you could get to where President Trump and Senator Vance sat every night, except for Idaho. Somehow Idaho had slightly better seats than we had, but we were really, really close. And so on Monday, when the president came out for the first time since the assassination attempt, it felt like I'd never felt that feeling before. It felt like I was inside a history book, like I was watching something that my grandkids would watch one day. So I had an amazing week. Fresh is one way to put it. Fresh off that, it's a really long week because you end up being on the convention floor for all these speeches, and then you end up getting in bed maybe at like midnight or so, and then you got to wake up the next morning and start knocking out work and doing meetings to try to catch up from the previous day, and then and then so we finished up the week. It was an amazing week. And then the big IT crash happens. And so
Yeah.
everybody's flights get messed up. I was lucky enough to get out of Milwaukee, but I was telling you, I had to sprint through the Dallas airport. So if you saw like a skinny dude with a black backpack on running through the Dallas airport on Friday afternoon, that was me. And I made it. I made my flight. I wanted to get back home to see my kids and was able
Yeah,
to
you
make it back.
did. So we're so grateful that you all got back safely. Tell me, just coming away from that convention after everything that has happened with President Trump, I saw him walk out that first night and just I couldn't stop the tears from just
Yeah.
streaming down my face
Yeah.
because what a monumental moment and what a powerful man to be able to jump back up
Yep.
and say, fight, 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 continue to fight, to say that to the American people, and then to make it to that convention and to be there every night. I mean, it was emotional for me. I can only
Yeah.
imagine how emotional it must have been for someone who was actually there in person.
Yeah, it definitely was an emotional moment. I mean, the other thing that I kept thinking about was this guy's just a brawler. I mean, this is just a tough guy. So he stands up immediately after being shot, blood on his face, and holds up his fist and encourages everyone around him, not even concerned about himself, clearly encouraging the people around him that this is why we're here. This is what we're here to do. We're here to fight for our country and fight for the future of our republic. And then when he comes out that night on Monday, there was just I think there was a relief in the crowd to see him doing so well. And this is the other thing I kept thinking, whether it was him coming out every single night to listen to the speeches with a bandage on his head half the time, all of the time, or then standing up and giving a really powerful 90-plus minute speech. I leaned over to one of my colleagues in the Mississippi delegation and I said, imagine Joe Biden trying to do this. I mean,
Yeah.
imagine him trying to stand up and give a 90-minute speech about what he believed about the country. Just would be completely incapable of doing that. And of course, now Democrats have suddenly realized that and they've
Yeah.
kicked him off the ballot. The Democratic Party, the great defenders of democracy,
Right.
they have ignored the will of all their voters and they've kicked him off the ballot and I assume they're going to put Kamala in his place. And the thing that I keep thinking over and over again is that those folks told us, the American people, that Joe Biden is completely healthy. He's a great guy. He's got a ton of energy. He just has some bad moments. They were saying that up until the moments before he released the letter saying that he was not going to be on the ballot.
Right.
They were still lying to the American people moments before this happened. And I just keep thinking, if they're willing to lie to you about that, one of the most important things, the question of whether or not the leader of their party and the president of the United States is capable of being a candidate and running the country, if they're willing to lie to you about that, what else are they willing to lie to you about? That's what we
Exactly.
need to remember as we head to November.
Exactly. And, you know, I feel like the American people saw it a long time ago, saw that this man couldn't seem to put a coherent sentence together, you know, much less be able to run the country. So, yeah, as auditor, as someone who investigates fraud, I mean, where do you stand on that? I think someone should be held accountable. He's obviously not been capable of running the country, so there's been these people covering for him, and obviously someone else making the decisions of the president of the United States. So, how do you feel about that, like as an auditor?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it and I think it's politics as usual for Democrats. I mean, they've lied about tons of stuff and they never seem to be held accountable. The real mechanism for holding Democrats accountable for saying things that aren't true and telling the country that President Biden is in a good position and is energetic enough to lead. The real mechanism for accountability is it should be the media, but they're never going to do it. So the only thing left is us, the
Mhm.
voters. That's it. You know, there's never going to be another mechanism to make sure that they're held responsible for what they did. And so we have to remember that now, even though Joe Biden is not going to be on the ticket. We've got to remember that all of these lies and all of the destruction of our country that we've seen, we've got to hold the Democratic nominee, whoever that is, and I guess it's going to be Kamala. We've got to hold that person accountable for what happened over the course of the last 2 years. That's the only way we get our country back on the right track, I think.
I agree. I completely agree. And you know, I'm with an organization called Moms for Liberty. I mean, I think you've heard of us,
I
but
have, yeah.
you know, we are committed, you know, to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and defend their parental rights at all levels of government. And what we have seen is just the tragedy of what's taking place in the public system. And I know that you have been a huge advocate for DEI and ridding our state of the DEI that we're seeing funneled into not
It's terrible.
only, you know, not only our colleges, but all the way down, you know, to elementary school ages. So, tell me kind of what your office has been working on when it comes to DEI.
So we started noticing other states doing projects to quantify how much their states were spending on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for those of you who haven't heard of this, I bet you every listener that you have has heard of this because you keep them informed. But DEI, you know, may sound like nice words to some, but what we know about it is DEI programs are programs that exist in big companies, at universities, at schools, and they push these companies or employers or schools to hire based on diversity rather than merit. They do trainings for employees, tell them about all sorts of crazy stuff, and try to indoctrinate them into a specific set of ideas. They're constantly preaching from the text of Ibram Kendi, who's a writer who says, you know, whiteness is one of the biggest problems in America, whatever that word means to him. These are just crazy, crazy ideas. And unfortunately, over the past few years, these crazy ideas have not only permeated the private sector, but they've also started to permeate government, which means that you and I, the taxpayer, are subsidizing them. So when President Trump was in office, he actually banned DEI trainings in the federal government. Of course, when Joe Biden was elected, he brought them all back. But we're seeing these DEI programs exist up and down the ladder, exactly like you said, Lindsay, from K-12 all the way up through our university system. And so one of the states that started looking into this really early on was Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis' office did a study that quantified how much Florida taxpayers were spending on DEI. And that I saw that and I said, well, I'm kind of curious too. How much are
Mhm.
Mississippi taxpayers spending on this, if anything? So we contacted Governor DeSantis's office And we asked them, how did you analyze this question? What programs did you look at? How did you pitch this question to your universities? And then we basically copied what they did and did it in Mississippi. And using what our universities said was DEI spending and their definition of DEI, we cataloged all the different programs that would fall under the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We found some that they didn't self-report to us, and we went back and asked them and said, "Hey, why didn't you tell us about this?" And they said, "Oh yeah, that too. That's definitely DEI." I mean, sometimes like a person whose title was diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, we were like, you need to include that as a cost.
Right.
So we catalog all this. And what we found, to cut straight to the point, is between 2019 and 2023, our universities here, our Mississippi public universities, spent about $23 million on DEI. $11 million of that was our money, state taxpayer dollars. And we published that report. And that was really our first step on DEI, was to show the taxpayers, here's what you're paying for this. And if you don't like this, you need to start calling your lawmakers, call your legislator, and tell them, I don't want my money going for something like this. And then since we released that report, we really haven't seen any action out of the legislature, unfortunately. So I have continued to point out specific instances of what these DEI offices are doing, how much money is going to pay for specific salaries. And of course, every time you point out another specific instance of what the money is going toward, people get angrier and angrier, as they should, because they see how crazy this stuff is and they don't like that their money's going toward it.
Right, and, I know Senator Angela Hill had a bill this past session that didn't come out of committee, and
Yep.
we had her on the podcast, and she was talking about that, but how can the average person show their legislators or show the legislature in Mississippi that, hey, this is not what we want our money being spent on?
Yep. I think you hit the nail on the head. Senator Hill's bill is the bill. That's a good bill, and the legislature needs to pass it. And I think the governor would sign it like that if the
Mhm.
legislature passed it. But if you're talking to your friends, and for anybody listening out there, what do they need to do? Well, they need to call their legislator in January and say, I want you to vote for Senator Angela Hill's bill that would kill funding for DEI at our public universities. And then if their legislator says, well, I don't know about that, maybe DEI is not so bad, then they need to go to my Twitter account and they need to search DEI. And I have chronicled over and over and over again what all this money is going toward. And then they need to print those off and take them to their legislator and say, is this what you're for?
Mhm.
This crazy stuff
Yeah.
right here. And if you're for it, okay, that's your political position. But if you're not for it, you need to vote for Senator Angela Hill's bill. That's the answer.
And for example, I think you've talked a little bit about drag queen
Yep.
question and answer time,
Yep.
and then social justice yoga for
preschoolers. Yeah, that's right.
And
you can't even make this stuff up.
Right. It's outrageous, and like the sexuality of music and over time, the history, and it's like, why? It almost makes me speechless, takes my words out of my mouth, because it's you feel like you're living in the twilight zone. Like, how can this be happening? How can this be called education?
Yep.
It just is mind blowing.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I'll pick on Ole Miss for a minute. My alma mater. Ole Miss has a huge DEI office. They have over 20 staffers who are dedicated to DEI. The head staffer that they have dedicated to DEI makes more money than the governor and the lieutenant governor combined.
Outrageous. Absolutely.
That's what
outrageous.
your money is going for. And you mentioned one of the things that they accomplished. So I always ask myself, well, what did this big office of 20 people and this highly paid staff, or what did they accomplish? Well, they spell it out in their own documents that they put online. One of their biggest accomplishments last year was handing out a grant to study equity-based preschool yoga. I couldn't make that up if I tried. I mean, I have 3 kids, ages 5, 2, and 1. I bet if I really tried, I could teach them yoga, but I don't know what equity-based preschool yoga is. I have no idea. So you think about all the money that we're spending that goes to stuff like that. And I want you to just compare it to North Carolina. North Carolina, which is supposedly a purple state, not even a red state anymore, they say, and we're supposed to be the conservative state. North Carolina took all of their DEI funding. They canceled all of it, and they put every penny into campus police. Every penny into campus police.
Wow.
Now imagine how much safer our campuses would be if we just took the millions of dollars we're spending on DEI and we rededicated it to that. Other states are leading the way, and I can name them off: North Carolina, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho, Utah, North Dakota, Wyoming, Kansas. I mean, all these states are banning DEI spending, and they're rededicating those dollars to things that matter. And we're just not. We're just not. You and I are continuing to fund this stuff, despite the fact that, folks like me and you have been complaining about it for 2 years now.
Right, and, it's crazy because when I talk to some of our legislators and I say, "These things are happening and they don't need to be happening in our state," the response that I get from so many is, "That doesn't happen here.
Yep.
This is Mississippi. We have a super Republican majority. Those things aren't an issue here. Those aren't the things that we need to be worried about." And yet, I beg to differ because
Yep.
it is happening here, and if you don't believe it is, then you've got to wake up and look at what's going on before we're not
Yep.
a super majority Republican state anymore.
That's right. To me, I hear that all the time, the same exact thing that you hear. And to me, when I hear that, it's like when people were saying that Joe Biden is of sound mind and body before that debate.
Yeah,
Like, I don't believe you because I have eyes.
exactly.
I can see what he is. And then all of a sudden, when the debate happens and the entire country tunes in, then everybody realizes, and it's impossible to deny, right?
Mhm.
So when those folks tell me, well, DEI is not so bad here, and we don't have it, we don't have those crazy programs here, I don't believe you because I have eyes. I can Google it and see it on the university websites.
Exactly.
You can just talk to these people about the programming that they're doing with our money inside the DEI apparatus. We can see it. That's the problem.
Another pushback I get, and I'm sure that you get this as well, is that I'm racist. Okay,
Mhm.
well, that's racist. If you look at what we're seeing in schools, critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical theory in general, so we're teaching one group of people that because you look a certain way, you aren't good enough, you're oppressed.
Mhm.
You've always been oppressed. And then we're teaching another group of people that because you look a certain way, you're bad. You're the
Mhm.
oppressor, even though we things that happened 50 years ago didn't concern us. We weren't here yet.
Mhm.
To me, that's racist.
Yep.
But they are spinning that in a way that if you dare to speak up, then you're not politically correct and you're a racist.
Yep, that's exactly right. And what that means is we have to have courage. You just can't listen to those people, and you have to blaze past their criticism. I really, I count myself lucky because this for me started a long time ago. So when I was in law school, I went to a law school full of liberals and at Harvard, and I was the president of the Federalist Society up there, so the conservative student organization. I had hate mail about me written to the dean of Harvard Law School. We served Chick-fil-A actually at one of our events, and we had hate mail about the Chick-fil-A written about the Federalist Society to the dean of Harvard Law School. So I just got over it. Really early in my life, I just got over it, and I said, I don't care what these people think. I'm going to stand up for what I think is right. I'm going to think critically about it. I'm going to make my argument, and you can call me whatever name you want. You calling me names is a sign that you don't have a counter argument. And the other crazy thing that I always think about is most of the people who have called me a racist for talking about DEI are white people. It's really fascinating.
And right,
It's
right.
really, really fascinating. So my wife is not white. She hates DEI as much as I do because we're raising our 3 kids to believe that it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, you treat everybody the same. It doesn't matter. You treat everybody as if they are equal in the eyes of God because that's how God made us.
Mhm.
And we don't want anybody, especially at the university level, teaching them to believe something different. But for some reason, you got these activists out there who want to turn this around on us and come after me and you and say, "Oh, well, you're racist for saying this." But they don't understand that good, God-fearing, decent people, regardless of what your skin color is, don't like this stuff.
Mhm.
We don't like this stuff. And the reason we don't like it is it's undermining the way we're trying to raise our kids. And for folks when I talk to some of these legislators who kind of dismiss this and they say, well, this is not happening here, we know it is. For folks who are saying that, they have to wake up and realize that we are in a fight for the minds of the next generation of Americans right now. We're in the middle of that fight. And one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to realize that and you're going to get on board with us and you're going to help us shut this stuff down, or you're going to pretend like it's not happening, and your kids and your grandkids are going to be indoctrinated and they're going to be crazy. In
Right.
5, 10, 15 years, they're going to be crazy. So you got a choice to make. And I think part of our function as people who have a little bit of a platform and can speak out, part of our function is to let people know what's going on out there and what this
Yeah.
fight looks like.
Yeah. And yeah, I tell parents all the time, even parents that are homeschooling their children because they see the problems in the public school system. We also have to worry about this next generation regardless, because that's going to be the peers of your children who you've taught correctly, but they're going to be thrown out into a world of indoctrinated children.
Yep.
So I think we all have to care about this issue because it's just that important.
That's right. That's right. And you can raise your kids right. You can teach them the right way to think about life and treating other people with dignity. But your kids I've got 3 kids, that's 3 votes in the future. What about all the other kids, right?
Exactly.
If we want our country to do well and our country to be rooted in the idea that God gives us liberty, and the government is there to protect that liberty and protect us. If we want them to believe that America is still the greatest force for good the world has ever known and the greatest country the world has ever known, if we want them to be rooted in those values, we got to teach our kids, but we also have to make sure our institutions, like the university system, are not completely overrun with countervailing different ideas. That is the
Right.
task of our generation of this time right now. What are we going to do to make sure those institutions are not completely, totally corrupted, and that we're handing our kids something that is still worth saving?
Exactly. You know, I have been really trying hard to educate people on the Biden administration and the Department of Education's Title IX rewrite that was handed down, that was set to go into effect August 1st. And a lot of people focus on, let's save women's sports, which absolutely, that's a huge deal. But what I also wanted people to understand is that's not all this was going to do. This was going to do so much more, not only affecting our girls, but also affecting our boys on college campuses. If this rule goes into effect, they can be accused of, rape or sexual misconduct. And instead of having a day in court and getting their due process, this is going to go to maybe one person within the university and the DEI department who is going to decide whether they are innocent or guilty. So to me, that's terrifying as a mom that has 2 sons. So we've got to be focused on all of it, not just a single part of it, because there's so much to it.
I'm glad you're informing people about that. I've got 2 daughters and my youngest is a little boy, and I worry about that for him. Let me tell you how crazy that idea is that you just sketched out. The idea of taking away due process is particularly from young men at the university level. When the Biden administration, when this idea first bubbled up, this idea was so crazy that liberal professors at Harvard Law School signed a letter saying that this goes too far. When you get liberal law professors at Harvard Law School saying, wait a minute, you can't really deny somebody all of their due process rights, it's a sign you've gone completely off the deep end. I remember when that letter came out, I read some of the names of the professors and I thought, that person had never voted for a Republican. I mean, that it was full of Democrats and liberals, but this idea is so insane that I sort of assumed that it would never get put into a serious federal regulatory document. But lo and behold, here we are, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff that's at stake with this election in November. And it frankly doesn't even matter that Joe Biden is off the ticket and now Kamala, I guess, is on. Those policies are on the ticket. That's the
Exactly.
bottom line.
Exactly. Yeah, when this 1,000-page document came out in April, my head was just spinning.
God bless you for reading it. Somebody needs to.
Yeah, it full of just horrible, horrible things that could take place. not only with our students, but our teachers, being able to have civil rights violations and lawsuits brought against you for misgendering or mispronouncing someone
Gosh.
in the elementary age when they can change, but day by day,
Yeah.
what they feel they are. We've just gotten so far away from God's plan and what God intended that it really is mind-boggling.
And free speech too. That's just the government coercing somebody to say a
Right.
thing. And, that's the kind of stuff that we heard was happening in Canada and other places, other countries that are further to the left than America has been historically. But we're right there with them now. Our
Mhm.
country, under the leadership of Joe Biden, is right there with them now, unfortunately. So it all goes back to that main point, which is like we're in this spiritual war
Mhm.
for the future of this country. And are we going to engage in a battle of ideas? Are we going to stand up and make our arguments, talk about what's going on here and try to persuade other people to go with us? Or are we just going to kind of back down because we're afraid of being called names? That's the choice we face.
Right, exactly. A few years ago, you did a video, I guess it was maybe on your Facebook, but you were talking about some of the books and material that you were
Mhm.
finding in school libraries that was just seemed to be impossible. Like, how did it get there?
Yep.
Did you have much pushback when you came out with some of that
Oh
material?
yeah. Oh yeah. Um, you know, Around that time, I'd gotten wind that a nonprofit in Mississippi had pulled down a bunch of taxpayer dollars, so government
Mhm,
funding, to help the State Library Commission, which is a government entity,
mhm,
identify some books that they called, their anti-racist bookshelf for kids.
mhm.
And if your listeners haven't heard of this term anti-racist, I think it was invented by Ibram Kendi. And again, anti-racist sounds like, well, you're not a racist. That's right. That's good, right? It's a terrible set of ideas because it indoctrinates people to feel bad about themselves based on the color of their skin,
Mhm.
and even tells kids to do the same. So I started looking through the reading list that they developed using taxpayer funds, just out of curiosity. And I was familiar with some of the craziest of the books that were out there because I'd seen these books being discussed in other states.
Mhm.
And so, lo and behold, the reading list is chock full of some of the craziest stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the craziest stuff. So I thought, there's just no way that they actually did this in Mississippi and they spent taxpayer dollars to buy these books and then put them in a Mississippi library. I have to see this for myself. So I got in the truck and I went down to the closest public library that I could find and pulled out my library card and went into the kids section. And lo and behold, like the first books you
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
are these crazy, crazy books. And so I picked one up, checked it out, went back to my office and did a video where I read it, not
Mhm.
my words, like the words of the book. And one of them, written by a white woman from Brooklyn, talked about how whiteness was a bad deal and that little kids needed to know that. Um, Imagine telling a little kid that blackness is a bad deal,
Mhm.
that the color of their skin could be turned into, you know, this concept which is hurtful to other people. That's such a bad thing to say to a little kid. And so I did this video and told taxpayers, this is what your money's being spent on. If you don't like it, then tell your legislator to ask the library commission why they used your money to put this into libraries. And frankly, I could have pulled a lot of additional books that had not only controversial content, but sexually explicit content
Yeah.
that are in the children's sections of our libraries here.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did it to serve as a wake up call for parents. And look, maybe parents don't take their kids to the library anymore. I take my kids to the library all the time. That's one of our favorite activities. And look, you can walk in the door, and a lot of these books that I know are insane
Mhm.
are propped up right there in front of the kids, ready to be read. And they're full of sometimes messages that you don't want your kids reading, but sometimes stuff that is downright inappropriate.
Yeah.
And that's what we as parents, unfortunately, have to be on guard about. Nobody's going to do it for us.
Right.
I can do the best that I can do as state auditor, but really I'm still also a dad, trying to raise kids when I go home and trying to do my day job and then serve in the military simultaneously. So it takes all of us being vigilant about what books are out there, going to public meetings, asking our legislator to hold the library commission accountable. All these things are not going to happen unless we're unified and working together on it.
Right. And yeah, I believe that Mississippi should be one of the next states to pull out of the American Library Association because we are just seeing these big groups that we've always been able to trust or thought that we could trust that now are just being run by Marxists. And that is happening, whether anyone wants to believe that or not. That is what's happening. You know, at Madison County Schools, I actually went to Tri-County and listened to a lecture from a man about critical race theory. And during that lecture, he talked about some of the books they're finding in schools, and I thought there's no way that anything like that would ever be in a Mississippi school district. But I went and looked and was shocked at what I found. And so went to the school board, and I've come to the conclusion now that the reason these books are coming into our schools the way they are is because there are certain books that are recommended to the librarians at the first of the year. Scholastic is a huge organization that recommends these books, and Scholastic has always been the fun book fair that we got to go to as kids. And you get to give your kids money and they get to go pick out books during the book fair, and it's fun and they love it. Who knew that this organization now is recommending this content that is so sexually explicit and graphic? There are pictures. It's basically pornography in our school libraries, and I was shocked. And so, when you start to speak out on that, you're called a book banner or a book burner. So it really is going to take parents just doing their due diligence and watching every single thing that their kids bring home, every single assignment that they're assigned, because it's out there and it's being put into every single school that I've seen in every county across the entire country.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is he's an older gentleman. He's been a Democrat his entire life, lives here in Mississippi. And unfortunately, I think a lot of folks who are Democrats who are his age don't know that this is going on or how bad it is. So he called me and he said basically the same thing. He said, "Why are you calling for banning books in libraries?" And I just said, "Well, let me just ask you a question. If there were hardcore pornography in the kids section of a library, what do you think we should do about that?" And he said, "Well, I don't think that's happening." So I gave him a specific example of one in a Mississippi library. And his reaction was, "Oh." And I said, "So this is happening." And so my question to you now again is, what would you have us do about that as a society? What should we do about that? And he said, "Well, I could tell he was like struggling to think of what the answer is. He said, "I would trust the librarian. If the librarian wants it to be in there, then we should have it in there." And I said, "Why?" Why? If the librarian says that Hustler needs to be over here, why would you trust the librarian to say that Hustler needs to be there? They're being pushed by an organization to put it on a list to go on the shelves, or they were taught that this is part of the new, pantheon of books that they need to be reading when they went through their library sciences degree or whatever it was at university. Why would you trust them if you know that this is the kind of book that ends up on the shelves as a result? And they have no answer. There is no answer for this. What they revert back to is, "Well, I just don't think we should be burning books." Like, okay, well, tell you what, you send your kid to the library and you let them walk through the section and we'll put this book in front of them and then you can deal with the consequences later. But as for me and my household, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say this is a bad idea. And I don't care if a librarian or a corporation or somebody else said, "No, we need to push this out there." And at some point, you just have to realize, like, you're going to face some criticism for calling this stuff out. We are called to be diligent in our arguments, to prove what we're saying, and to make the argument so that normal people out there who don't know about this stuff will hear us and they'll be persuaded. That's who we're trying to convince, not the people who are so indoctrinated and so far down the road they can't see the truth. We're trying to persuade normal parents who need to wake up to this stuff happening.
Yeah, and let them know that it is happening.
Yep.
So many don't know. So many believe that they send their kids to school and they trust that the school has their children's best interest at heart. And I can't complain too much here in Madison County. We have some great teachers in
Mhm.
Madison County, but you have to just be on guard because it is happening. It's out there. And I know you just released a study about the money that's being spent in Mississippi schools inside the classroom and outside the classroom. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Absolutely. Yeah, and let me say this too. We have some great teachers out there. This is not to demean teachers, public school teachers. My mom was a 35-year public school teacher. Two of my four grandparents were public school teachers. I went to public school all the way through, kindergarten all the way through. But you're right. We've got some schools that have allowed these books to be in there, and then more broadly, we have a spending problem. We as a system spend way too much money on administrative fat inside our K-12 school system and not enough money in the classroom. And anybody with any common sense knows that dollars that go to pay teachers and go into the classroom, those are the dollars that actually make a difference in kids' lives.
Right.
That's where the money has the biggest bang for the buck. Unfortunately, Mississippi is doing really poorly when you look at whether or not we're getting the dollars into the classroom. So Mississippi spends a higher percentage of our K-12 funds on administrative cost than every other state in the South, with the exception of Washington, D.C., which is not for fun in the analysis. That's every state from Delaware to Oklahoma. So we used a broad definition of the South. We were doing that analysis. We've got teachers still, unfortunately, even if you adjust for cost of living, we've got the lowest paid teachers in the country. And we've still got administrators, some of them in rural, poor school districts, making more than the governor. This does not make sense.
Yeah.
This does not make sense. We got teachers paying for their own classroom supplies, like my mom used to do. She was an art teacher. Art supplies are not cheap. We got teachers still paying for their own classroom supplies. And I think we still have the highest paid state superintendent in the country.
Yeah.
Not just the highest paid in the South, not just the highest paid by cost of living, like the highest paid in the country. So this stuff doesn't make sense. Our priorities are completely out of whack as a system. And so it goes back to what we were talking about earlier when I pointed this out for the first time. There was this group of crazy education advocates. That's what they call themselves.
Sure, I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
absolutely. It's Nancy Loom.
Yeah.
Nancy went out there and said, "Oh, Shad White is attacking our public schools." Like, you got to be crazy. Like, I'm trying to get the dollars to the kids. I'm trying to
Exactly.
get the dollars to the kids. That's what matters. I want to help our public schools. I want my kids to go through a school system where they're being prioritized, not some adult, the third or fourth procurement officer in the back office of the school district to get a salary raise. That's not who I care about. I care about my kids. I want my kids to be the beneficiary of these dollars. And I also know that if the teachers are taken care of, that my kids are going to have a better experience. So we need to take care of the teachers. That's what we've got to focus on. And we've got to have these tough conversations, or our school system is not going to improve. Mississippi has shown some improvement in our test scores in recent years, but we have so much further to go. And the only way we're going to get there, one of the only ways we're going to get there, is if we completely rethink how much money gets into the classroom and push those dollars there. That's where it matters.
I feel like there's a very simple solution when you look at how can we fund students instead of systems, or make sure that our children are seeing the dollars to help educate them and not the higher ups in the Department of Education. And this was, I think, the first year we saw a really big push in the legislative session for school choice. And I know there was a luncheon, the Mississippi Center for Policy held a luncheon with Betsy DeVos, and she spoke. And so I talked to her and her chief of staff afterwards, and they said something that you were saying earlier. We see the states around us doing this, and it's working. Why can't Mississippi get
Yep.
on board with the
Yep.
things that are good for education, that are working in education? So it's a little frustrating, but I think that that's where, people like you and I educating others and letting them know that there is a solution, there is an answer, but you've got to stay on top of your legislators and let them know, hey, we hired you, you work for
Yep.
us, so you've got to represent the people and advocate for the will of the people.
That's right. That's right. it is discouraging to see other states make such progress, and we allegedly have a conservative supermajority here in Mississippi, but a lot of the other reforms that seem to be passed into law in other southern states, other red states around the country just can't make it here. Can't
Yeah.
get through the system. We can't get a school choice bill passed that would expand options for parents.
Mhm.
We can't do what Texas did, which is to crack down on administrative spending in our K-12 school system. These are the frustrating things that I think parents see and policymakers see. But all we can do is push. That's the bottom line is we need to push. And we have seen in the places where the state has signed off on good policy, we have seen improvements as a result. I'm thinking about the third grade reading gate back
Mhm.
in 2012, 2013. When we said that you can't move from third to fourth grade unless you can read at a certain level, that completely revolutionized our outcomes at the fourth grade level, because now all of a sudden we're putting extra resources into these kids to make sure that they can learn to read. We're not letting them just go up to the next grade, and now our fourth grade reading scores, they start to look good compared to some of the other states. So we know that policy matters.
Mhm.
We know that if we actually do the common sense things that we need to be doing, that we're going to improve the lives of kids and make families' lives easier. But we've got so many of these good ideas that are just sitting out in front of us that are happening in Arkansas and Florida and Texas and other states. If we don't get serious and we don't start putting those into place, these other states are going to lap us.
Yeah.
They're going to pass us. We're not doing the basic common sense things that would make it better and easier to raise a family and educate your kids here in Mississippi. And we get a hold of that.
Yes. Just changing topics just a little bit. I
Sure.
know you have something very big coming up in the next couple of weeks, and something that I know you've worked really, really hard on as our state auditor. So tell us a little bit about your book that's coming out
Oh, yeah.
August 6th, right?
It's coming August 6th. I was trying to think of the thing that was big. I was like, I'm cooking steak for my family this weekend. Yes, I've got a book coming out on August 6th called Mississippi Swindle, and it's what happened. It's the story of what happened in Mississippi with the giant welfare scandal that we tragically had. And all told, of course, that's the largest public fraud scandal in the history of the state. Over $100 million of welfare money that was misspent. Multiple people, 6 folks now, have pleaded guilty to crimes for their role in what happened here. My office started investigating that back in the middle of 2019, and we're auditors, we're investigators on my team. We don't have the right to prosecute anybody, but we took the material that we dug up to prosecutors in early 2020, and local DA indicted 6 individuals. And then a couple months later, we released a massive audit that showed where all this welfare money went. And so all told, it is a terrible, tragic story for the state. But in order to make sure that something like this doesn't happen in the future or doesn't happen in other states, I thought it was important to completely set out what happened here for taxpayers, for anybody who wants to read. And in doing so, I tell people about myself and growing up in rural Jones County. I was very lucky. I did not grow up in poverty. My dad was an oil field pumper. My mom was a public school teacher. My parents stayed together. They put food on the table, and I'm skinny, so you can't tell, but I never missed a meal as a kid. I grew up in. I was very lucky in the environment that I grew up in, but I grew up next door to poverty. Our
Mhm.
neighbor, one house down, lived in a trailer, mattresses in the yard, pit bulls in the yard. I went to public school. Some of the kids I went to public school with got their only 2 meals of the day
Mhm.
at the public school cafeteria, breakfast and lunch. So I saw it up close firsthand. And in the book, I talk a little bit about growing up in this environment and then getting into a position where I'm seeing all of this welfare money being misspent. And I try to use that narrative to explain to the reader why I made the decisions that I made, who had the authority to do what over the course of the case, and then explain what happened so that hopefully we can institute some reforms here in Mississippi and nationwide so that we don't see this happen anywhere else.
So if there's someone out there that's listening, or just, the average everyday Mississippian and they see funds being misused or misspent, or they see some type of fraud taking place, how can they let you know or
Yep.
let your office know? What do they need to do about it?
Yep. We have a hotline, 1-800-321-1275. That's the hotline number for the auditor's office. You can call that anytime during normal business hours. If you have a tip that you want to give to us, not during normal business hours, Google State Auditor of Mississippi, and on the website that pops up, there's a big red report fraud button. You can click on that and put in information there. And I would encourage anybody out there who knows of anything that looks like fraud involving government funds, send it to us. And you may be right, you may be wrong. Sometimes things look bad, but they're just waste or they're just dumb spending.
Mhm.
But let us figure that out. We can figure that out. We have a team of trained professionals at the auditor's office, lawyers, CPAs, career investigators. They will figure out if there's something going on. And really, the people out there who are turning this information into us, that's the only way we're able to stop fraud. We do audits, but the deep dark secret of audits is that audits are very bad at identifying criminal activity. This is true all over the country. Most white collar criminal fraud schemes are uncovered by a whistleblower. This is according to research by the Association of Certified Fraud Investigators. So for people out there who are seeing something that doesn't make sense, give us a call and let us look at it. Because we've gotten so many good tips and because the team at the auditor's office has been so diligent, we have recovered more money in the last 6 years than any other 6-year period in the history of the state, about $76 million at this point.
It's incredible.
That's more than any other 6-year period by a lot. And I tell you that to brag on them, to brag on the team at the auditor's office. I told them very early on when I became state auditor, we're not going to pull any punches. We're going to be fair. We're going to analyze every fact that we can get our hands on, and we're not going to worry about who this implicates or whether it's going to hurt somebody's feelings. We're going to work our cases, do them well, and give them to prosecutors. And because that team bought into that idea and really was sold on this mission, that's why we've been able to get all this stuff done. It's not just Shad sitting at a computer every day working on this stuff. It's because a bunch of other people are dedicated to their craft and believe in that mission at the auditor's office.
What about election fraud? When it comes to elections, we have this huge election that's so important. I guess probably the most important election that of my lifetime,
Mhm.
especially. But what if there is, or if people are suspecting there's voter fraud? Do they come to you, or do they? I really don't know. This is not my area, but is
Yep.
it the Secretary of State, or do they come to you with that? Where does that fit in?
It's a great question. We don't have any jurisdiction over elections. So if you see election fraud, I would tell you you need to simultaneously give it to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office. So the Secretary of State's office can look into some of this kind of stuff, but they ultimately don't really have the enforcement power to crack down on anybody. That's at the Attorney General's office. So if I'm out there and I see somebody stuffing a ballot box or doing something bad, I'm calling both. I'm going to tell them both about it. And I think you're right. You're 100% right. I mean, this kind of stuff happens all over the place. Um, this process is supposed to be sacrosanct. This
Mhm.
is supposed to be the thing that guarantees that we get representatives who share our values and are going to respond to us, the people and the taxpayers. And if you don't have a process that you can trust, then you start to lose faith in government, period.
Right.
So I would tell anybody out there listening, if you see election fraud in Mississippi, report it to the Secretary of State's office, report it to the Attorney General's office. They're ultimately responsible for holding people accountable. And again, it takes all of us. We're just going to have to be vigilant about what we see out there. I will say this: if something involves taxpayer funds misspent by an elections commission, then my office can look at it. So to
Okay.
give you an example, a couple of years ago, you may have read Mark Zuckerberg sent a bunch of money around the country, mainly to blue districts, to help pay for stuff during COVID. So it was supposed to pay for PPE, masks, and clear plastic dividers, and all kinds of stuff like that. And so he sends all this money out. And once that money reached the local elections commissions, it became government money once it hits their bank account. So Mississippi got some of this money. Hinds County specifically got some of these Zuckerbucks is what they were called. And we found that money was used to purchase things like big TVs, and the TVs magically just walked off. And so we investigated this kind of thing and made multiple arrests, got multiple guilty pleas out of that specific investigation. That's the only kind of stuff that we can do related to elections, is if somebody steals some property or something like that belongs to the taxpayers. But if it's about election fraud and tampering with the voting and the election results, take that to the Secretary of State's office, take it to the AG's office.
Thank you for clarifying that,
Sure.
because that
Yeah, yeah,
really
yeah.
was something that I was unsure about, and because I know you investigate fraud, but wasn't sure if it went,
Yep.
into election fraud. Well, Shad, I cannot thank you enough as a mom, as a Mississippian, and as someone who really cares about education and the programs that we're seeing come down, such as DEI and CRT and SEL. All they make up all these new names for these programs to
There'll
make
be
them
another
sound better.
name tomorrow.
Yeah, they
Yep.
will. And I hate they've hijacked all these words that were not bad words. They aren't terrible words, but now they're associated with something completely different. And I guess it's so that they make it sound like they are putting something great into your child's hands when it's really quite the opposite. But I just really appreciate you for being transparent and bringing light to some of these things and fighting for the future of Mississippi. I really applaud you, and I'm thankful for you. So thank you so much for all that you do, and thank you for being here and talking about all these things with us.
No, thank you for having me, Lindsey. And I'll say two things to close. I mean, one, I'm grateful for the work that you're doing, because I think that parents are the most powerful political force in America. And I say that as somebody who is a parent and worries constantly about the future that we're leaving our kids. That leads to the second thing I was going to say, which is that is the most motivating factor in my life. I am deeply committed to doing my job for the taxpayers, but I got a little extra gas in the tank when I feel like my taxpayer dollars are being spent in a way that might hurt my kids.
Yeah.
I wake up a little bit earlier on those days when we're working on something that relates to that. And there's a bunch of parents out there who feel the exact same way, like you and like your listeners. And so that's what gives parents political power, is that we care about our kids. And whenever you feel down, or whenever you see the media trying to mislead the country, or whenever you're making an argument and somebody tells you you don't know what you're talking about, but you've got the proof, just remember there are more of us than there are of them. There are more parents who care about their kids engaged in this fight than there are media elites or lawmakers who don't agree with you, or whatever it is. That's the thing we have to keep coming back to. So thank you for what you're doing, keeping folks informed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate you so much.
Of course, yeah.
And then I'm going to hear a word from, or talk about, our sponsors real quick. Do you have that? So we've got Sean Yerkeron, who's got the Yerkeron Law Firm. He specializes in DUI and criminal defense law. You can find him at onetextlaw.com, or you can send him a text or give him a call at 601-906-9094, or find him on his Facebook page. And his motto is that just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty. So if you need a lawyer, give the Yerkeron Law Firm a call. And then also Clay Edwards. He's got the Clay Edwards Show, WIAB, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 a.m. And he's also partnered with Men's Health of Mississippi. So if you're suffering from any symptoms such as fatigue, lack of interest, low libido, brain fog, your sleep, if you're not sleeping well, give Men's Health of Mississippi a call, or you can text Clay to 601-327 8550, and they will do a free screening, get your blood work done, check your levels, and see how they can help you with Men's Health of Mississippi. So give them a call if you need them. And thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next week.